He built an empire on fear. She built a wall around her heart. Neither one was prepared for what happens when a mafia boss pretends to be someone's husband and stops pretending. In Seoul's most dangerous underground, Kang Min-jae had never lost control of anything. Until a crying waitress in a jazz cafe asked him one impossible question on a rainy Thursday night. What you're about to witness will break you and rebuild you in the same breath. Stay until the very end. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came down hard that Thursday, the kind that turned Seoul's neon reflections into something ugly and smeared across the pavement like a painting left out too long. Kang Min-jae stood outside the entrance of Blue Fern Jazz Cafe for exactly 4 seconds before pushing the door open. 4 seconds was how long it took for his lead bodyguard, a thick-necked former military contractor named Do Sung-wook, to sweep the interior with his eyes and give the faintest nod. Clean. No threats. Proceed. Min-jae stepped inside without acknowledging the nod. That was how it worked between them. Acknowledgement was for men who needed reassurance. The cafe was narrow, warm in the way old wooden buildings hold heat. A specific smell of roasted barley and something faintly sweet, like vanilla left on a warm stove. A three-piece jazz band occupied a corner platform barely big enough for all 3 musicians. The bassist was sweating through his shirt. The pianist had his eyes closed. The trumpet player hadn't gotten the memo that the song they were playing had already ended, and he was coasting 2 bars past everyone else, which no one mentioned. Min-jae took his usual table, the one with the wall at his back and a clean line of sight to both exits. He didn't sit until Sung-wook confirmed the booth behind was empty. Old habit. The kind that kept a man breathing. He was 33 years old. He looked older in the eyes. Younger in the jaw, still sharp, still angular in a way that made people assume he was merely wealthy before they spent more than a minute studying the stillness he moved with. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, the top button undone, which was the only concession he made to the idea of being off-duty. The watch on his wrist was not ostentatious, but it cost more than most people in this neighborhood, made in 3 years. He did not wear it for display. He wore it because time was the only thing he measured with precision anymore. He picked up the laminated menu out of reflex. Though he had never once ordered anything from it, he didn't already know by heart. She appeared from the kitchen door with a tray balanced on her forearm and a pen tucked above her ear, and Min-jae did not look up immediately. He didn't need to. He had heard the particular rhythm of her footsteps enough times that he could identify her crossing a room without looking. Quick, slightly uneven on the left, like she'd rolled an ankle at some point in the past, and it never fully recovered. "You're late," Nia Brooks said, setting a glass of water on the table without being asked. "It's 7:42. You're usually here by 7:15. Traffic. You have a driver. He also gets stuck in traffic." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a dismissal, and she pulled out her notepad. Her handwriting, he had noticed over months of watching her work, was enormous for a person of her size. She wrote like she was afraid the letters might escape. Nia Brooks was 29 years old, an African-American woman from Atlanta who had landed in Seoul 14 months ago for reasons she had never fully explained to anyone at the cafe. Though Min-jae had known within 3 weeks of his first visit exactly what those reasons were. He had people for that kind of information. He had not asked them. He had simply waited until she offered the shape of the story herself, in pieces, across weeks. She was tall. Not model tall, just tall enough that she stood out in rooms, which she compensated for by keeping her shoulders slightly drawn inward, a habit of a person who learned early that taking up space invited comment. She wore her hair natural, pulled back on shift nights, with 2 small gold hoops in each ear. She had a gap between her front teeth that showed when she smiled genuinely versus when she smiled professionally. At Blue Fern, the professional smile was what she deployed almost exclusively. Almost. She gave Min-jae the genuine one sometimes. He had never told her he noticed the difference. "Same as always?" she asked. "The barley tea. Whatever the kitchen is finishing tonight." She wrote it down even though she already knew, which he understood was simply how she managed her work. Every detail written, nothing left to memory. Chef Yoon made doenjang jigae with extra tofu tonight. He'll be offended if the table doesn't order it. Then order it. You don't like tofu. Chef Yoon has feelings. She looked at him for a moment. You're surprisingly considerate for someone who looks like he could end a man's career with one phone call. Min-jae said nothing. He looked back at the menu. She left, and he let out a slow breath through his nose. It had started by accident, the way the only things worth noting ever do. He had come to Itaewon 11 months ago for a meeting at a restaurant 2 blocks down that ended with a rival lieutenant leaving the table with broken fingers and a newly adjusted understanding of territorial boundaries. Min-jae had been keyed up afterward in the particular way violence left him. Not agitated, not triumphant, but hollowed out in a way that demanded something quiet and warm to fill it. He had seen the blue neon fern in the cafe window and walked in without purpose. Nia had taken his order without flinching at the bodyguards, without performing curiosity about his suit, without asking a single question that wasn't strictly professional. She had brought him tea and set it down like he was simply a man who needed something warm, and she had not hovered. She had not tried to be charming or impressive or careful. She had simply done her job and left him alone. He came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. Now Chef Yoon knew to keep extra tofu on Thursday nights, and the jazz band had been informed through some unnamed channel to play quieter sets between 7 and 9, which Min-jae had not arranged directly, but which Sung-wook had seen to without being asked. This was how Min-jae's world operated. Things were managed, requests were anticipated, problems were addressed before they became visible. Nia returned with the tea and set it down. She stood at the edge of the table for a moment longer than usual. He noticed. Something, he said. She looked up. What? You're standing there like you have something to say and you're deciding whether to say it. That's a very specific read on someone just setting down a cup of tea. Is it wrong? She pressed her lips together. The pen turned in her fingers once. No, she said finally. It's not wrong. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, which she had never done before. Not once in 11 months. Min-jae set the menu down. Her face, he noticed, was not the same as it had been an hour ago when he'd walked in. Her eyes had gone red at the inner corners. Not from crying, not yet, but from the specific strain of a person who had been holding something tightly for too long and was starting to feel it slip. You know I have a friend, she said. Camille. She's Korean American from LA, but she's been in Seoul 6 years. We met at a language exchange. Min-jae waited. She's getting married in 3 weeks. The ceremony is in Busan. It's a full weekend thing. Friday arrival, Saturday wedding, Sunday brunch, and goodbyes. About 60 guests. Most of them people I've met through her over the past year. She stopped, looked at the table. And Marcus Reed is going to be there. Min-jae did not know the name yet. He stored it. He was your fiancé, Min-jae said. Not a question. She had mentioned a fiancé once, 7 months ago, briefly, in the middle of explaining why she'd left Atlanta, and then immediately changed the subject with the efficiency of someone slamming a door. Her jaw tightened. We were engaged for 11 months. He left 8 days before the wedding. She said it very flat, like something she had practiced saying without the feeling in it. He is currently dating a lifestyle influencer named Vivian Park, who has 400,000 followers and does sponsored content for skincare brands. They got together 2 months after he left me. Camille told me last week that they are both attending as a couple and that Marcus specifically asked if I was coming. Why did he ask? Because Marcus Reed has always needed an audience for everything he does, including moving on. She looked up then. Her jaw was still tight, but her eyes had gone wet, and she blinked once hard. I can't go alone. I can't sit in that room and watch him arrive with her and be the woman who got left 8 days before her own wedding. I can't. She stopped, pressed her fingers flat against the table. I've already RSVP'd. Yes, I can't back out now. Camille is one of the only real friends I have in this country. The trumpet player hit a wrong note across the room. Nobody reacted. Min-jae looked at her. He had heard hundreds of requests across his career, requests dressed as negotiations, as threats, as favors owed. He had learned to parse the real ask from the performance around it very quickly. The real ask here was not complicated. She was scared, not of Marcus Reed specifically, of what it felt like to be looked at like you were the one left behind. "What are you asking me?" he said. She met his eyes. The red in hers had deepened. "I'm asking you to come to Busan with me, for the weekend, as my husband." The word sat between them. "Husband," he said. "Fake husband. Obviously fake. I mean, I would explain everything. It would be a cover just for the wedding, and you don't have to—" She stopped, exhaled hard through her nose. "I know how this sounds. I know you're not. I know you probably have things to do, and I'm your waitress, and this is insane. And I don't even know why I'm asking you, except that you're the only person I've talked to consistently in this city for almost a year, and you're the only one who wouldn't—" She stopped again. "Wouldn't what?" She looked at him directly. "Make it weird." A long silence passed. The bassist switched to a softer register. Someone near the bar laughed at something. Sung Wook, positioned near the far wall, had not moved or changed expression, which meant he had not heard the specific words from that distance. Min-jae noted this without looking at him. He looked at Nia Brooks, sitting across from him with her hands flat on the table and her eyes wet and her professional smile absolutely nowhere on her face. And he thought about all the reasons he should say no. He could count them precisely. His schedule. The summit in Macau in 6 weeks that required groundwork. The fact that the Black Phoenix Syndicate's current restructuring negotiations required his attention to be nowhere except where it needed to be. The fact that appearing publicly and personally attached to a woman was the fastest way to create a leverage point for every rival he had accumulated across a decade of controlled violence. He thought about all of this. "Does the fake husband get to dance with his wife?" he said. She stared at him. "What?" "At the wedding, if the occasion calls for it. Does he get to dance?" The gap in her teeth appeared for exactly 2 seconds. Then she got it under control. Yes. Obviously, yes." He picked up his tea. 3 weeks is enough time to learn a convincing marriage. She blinked. You're saying yes." "I'm saying 3 weeks is not much time." He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "Tell me everything about Marcus Reed. What he looks like, how he moves, what he drives, what kind of man he is when he's performing, and what kind of man he is when nobody's watching." She opened her mouth, closed it, then she picked up the pen still in her hand and a blank page from the order notepad, and she began to talk. Min-jae listened the way he always listened, with everything, with nothing showing on his face. Outside, the rain hit the windows in waves, and Seoul glittered dirty and wet through the glass, and Sung Wook shifted his weight against the wall and watched the room, while his employer sat across from a woman who had no idea that the man she just asked to pretend to be her husband had spent the last 11 months quietly, carefully, making sure nothing in the world ever got close enough to hurt her. The following 2 weeks were unlike anything Min-jae had organized in his professional life, and he had organized the silent removal of 3 crime lords across 2 countries. They met on Tuesday and Saturday mornings at a dumpling house near Hongdae that opened at 6:30 and was populated at that hour exclusively by construction workers and elderly men playing chess. Nia brought notes, actual handwritten notes on folded paper. She brought him notes about herself, her parents' names, her sister's name, the neighborhood in Atlanta she grew up in, the year she started working in hospitality, the 2 places she'd traveled before Korea, the specific reason she found cilantro genuinely offensive at a molecular level. Min-jae read them once and remembered everything. She asked him questions in return, carefully, like she was aware she was walking towards something that might be hot. He answered what was necessary. He built a version of himself that was true enough to be consistent. His father's name, his mother's death when he was 9. A childhood in Mapo District. University and Business Administration, which was technically accurate in that he had attended 2 semesters before his father's illness, and the subsequent inheritance of an organization that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with its principles. He did not tell her what the Black Phoenix Syndicate actually was. She had never asked directly, in 11 months, about the bodyguards or the cars or the particular way rooms went quiet when he entered them. He had respected that. She had respected whatever the silence meant. It was its own arrangement. On the second Tuesday, she made him rehearse. "Okay," she said, sitting across from him in the dumpling house with her arms crossed, and an expression of professional seriousness that he had not seen from her before. It was the face of a woman who had been underestimated recently and was recalibrating. "I'm going to be someone at the wedding asking how we met. You answer." He looked at her. "The cafe. Too simple. People want texture. I sat in your section by accident, and you told me the soup was better than the menu suggested. I came back the following week to tell you the soup was not better than the menu suggested. You told me I had ordered the wrong soup. I came back a third time to order the correct soup. By that point, it seemed inefficient not to continue seeing each other." She stared at him. "Did you just come up with that right now? Is it wrong?" "No," she said slowly. That's very you." He didn't respond to that. She had a harder time with the physical dimension of it. Not uncomfortable, precisely, but careful in the way someone is when they've been burned and still remember the specific temperature. When he took her arm crossing a street during one of their walking rehearsals near Gyeongbokgung, she startled. When he placed a hand briefly at her lower back, guiding her through a crowd, she went very still for a half-second. He noticed both times. He said nothing either time. On the Friday before the Busan trip, Visima Osirkiu, they sat in the dumpling house a third time and ran through the guest list she'd memorized. He listened to the names and the associations. He cataloged the important ones. Marcus Reed, Table 6, attending with Vivienne Park, who was reportedly bringing a camera crew for content. Camille Seo, the bride, who was nervous and kind and had apparently made Nia promise 3 times via text that she was actually coming. David Kwan, the groom, whom Nia described as a structural engineer who laughed at everything and would not be a problem. And then Nia said the thing she'd been working up to for the entire meeting. "Marcus is going to ask about you." She set her coffee down. "Specifically, Camille told me he's already asked twice who I'm bringing." "What did Camille tell him?" "That I'm married and very happy." A pause. "He's not going to believe it," Nia said. "Not immediately. He knew me. He's going to look for the seam in it. He's going to wait for the moment he thinks he has me alone, and he's going to ask me something that pulls at the story." She looked at Min-jae. "I need you to not let him have that moment." Min-jae considered this. "Does he get physical?" She blinked. "What?" "No, Marcus is not. No, he's a manipulator, not." She stopped. "No, he just talks. He's very good at saying the right thing to make you feel like you're the problem." She looked at the table. "He made me feel that way for 2 years before I finally understood that was what he was doing." The flatness in her voice when she said it was the kind of flat that takes practice, the kind you build over a long period of pressing something down. Min-jae said, "He won't have a moment alone with you." She looked up. "Not because I'm preventing it," he said, "because a woman who is genuinely happy doesn't wander into corners with her ex-fiancé. You stay close because you want to. That's what he'll see. The wanting." She looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly conversational. Then she picked up her coffee. "You're very good at strategy." "Yes," he said. She smiled at her cup, not the professional one. On Saturday morning, they took the KTX to Busan. Min-jae had arranged for his personal car to be waiting at Busan Station. Sung-wook and one other man, Lim Tae-yang, traveled separately, in different clothes, with standing instructions to maintain a 2-block perimeter at all public events and remain completely invisible unless activated. Nia did not know about the perimeter. She sat beside him on the train with a travel pillow wedged between her shoulder and the window and her notes folded in her lap. Somewhere past Daejeon, she fell asleep. Her head tilted, corrected, tilted again, and then finally came to rest against his shoulder. Min-jae did not move. He watched the mountains roll past the window, pale green in the autumn light, and he thought about how specific and strange this was, to have arranged the entire controlled geometry of his life around a woman who did not know the first true thing about him, and to feel, in the specific warm weight of her sleeping against his shoulder, something that was not strategic and not useful, and was therefore, by every standard he'd applied to himself for 20 years, a problem. He did not move. He looked at the mountains until they ran out and the sea appeared on the left side of the train, flat and silver under the afternoon sky. Busan waited, And somewhere in that city, Marcus Reed was already rehearsing the performance of a man who had won. He didn't know yet what he was walking into. The hotel was called the Meridian Busan, and it sat 42 floors above the waterfront with a lobby that smelled like fresh eucalyptus and money. Nia stepped through the glass doors and stopped moving for exactly 1 second, taking in the height of the ceilings, the pale marble floors, the arrangement of white orchids on the center table that probably cost more than 2 weeks of her tips. Min-jae walked past her without stopping and went directly to the front desk. She caught up, stood beside him, watched him hand over a card without looking at the rate on the screen. The clerk turned toward him, and she made herself not react to the number she clocked in the corner of her eye. "One room?" the clerk asked, neutral and professional. "Yes," Min-jae said. Nia said nothing. They had discussed this. 1 room, 2 people, married. Anything else would have created a question, and questions were the enemy of a clean story. She had agreed to it in the dumpling house with the specific tone of a woman making a practical decision. She had not thought very hard about what it would feel like to stand in a marble lobby in Busan and hear the word confirmed out loud. The room was on the 31st floor. It had a king bed, a sitting area with a gray linen sofa, and a floor-to-ceiling window that framed the ocean like a painting someone had gotten right on the first try. Nia set her bag on the sofa and stood at the window for a moment. "I'll take the sofa," Min-jae said behind her. "You're too tall for the sofa." "I've slept in worse configurations." She turned around. He was already opening his travel bag on the luggage rack, completely unhurried, like a man who had stayed in 1,000 hotel rooms and learned not to have feelings about any of them. She noticed that he unpacked in a specific sequence: toiletry bag first, then suit, then everything else. It was the unpacking of someone who had a system for being ready to leave quickly. She filed that away without meaning to. "The welcome dinner starts at 7, she said. "Camille wants us there by 6:45. "What's the room configuration at the venue?" "Private function room on the 2nd floor. Long table, maybe 15 people tonight. The full guest list arrives tomorrow for the ceremony." He nodded. He had already hung the suit. He moved to the window and stood beside her, not close, looking at the ocean the same way she had been looking at it, like it was something that needed to be assessed rather than appreciated. "He'll be at the dinner," she said. "Yes." "With her?" "Likely." She pulled in a slow breath. The ocean outside was going dark at the edges, the sun dropping behind the city at their backs. "I need you to know something before we go down there," she said. I'm not doing this because I'm still in love with him. I want to be clear about that." Min-jae looked at her. "I know. I'm doing it because he made me feel small for 2 years, and then he left me 8 days before our wedding, and then he moved on in 2 months. And now he wants to walk into my friend's wedding with 400,000 followers on his arm and watch me react." Her voice was level. Her jaw was not. "I'm not giving him that." "No," Min-jae said. "You're not." She looked at him. His profile against the window, the ocean behind him, the particular stillness he carried that she had spent 11 months failing to name correctly. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." He looked back at the water. "Don't thank me yet." Boss. The function room had warm amber lighting and a long table set with cream linens and small arrangements of dark flowers she didn't know the name of. Camille Seo was standing near the entrance when they arrived, in a silk dress the color of champagne, and she grabbed Nia's hands before Nia had fully cleared the door. "You came," Camille said. "You actually came." "I said I would." "You said it 6 times in a way that sounded like you were trying to convince yourself." Camille's eyes moved over Nia's shoulder, and then her grip on Nia's hands tightened imperceptibly. "And you brought him." "Camille," Nia said, "this is Min-jae, my husband." Min-jae extended his hand. Camille shook it with the particular focus of a woman who was trying to take in a great deal of information in a short time. He was, by the standard of every man in the room, a significant physical presence, which had nothing to do with size and everything to do with the quality of his stillness. He wore a dark navy suit, no tie, and he looked at Camille the way he looked at most people who were not a threat, with complete, unhurried attention that somehow managed to feel like both interest and assessment simultaneously. "She talks about you," Camille said to him. I hope specifically, he said. Camille blinked. Then she laughed, surprised. She looked at Nia with an expression that said several things at once, none of them out loud. Nia kept her face arranged. David Kwan appeared at Camille's elbow, stocky, open-faced, laughing at something someone had said 3 seconds ago. He pumped Min-jae's hand enthusiastically and asked where he was from and whether he followed baseball, and Min-jae answered both questions in a way that produced more laughing from David and a follow-up question about statistics. And Nia watched this with something she couldn't fully categorize. She had known, abstractly, that Min-jae would be able to hold a room. She had not anticipated how effortless it would look, the way he scaled himself to whoever he was talking to without appearing to scale at all. Then Camille leaned close to Nia's ear. Table far end. Just sat down. Nia did not turn immediately. She counted 3 seconds. Then she turned slowly, with her chin up, and she looked. Marcus Reed was 31 years old, and he had the face of a man who had been told since childhood that he was exceptional, which had produced in him a specific kind of ease that read as confidence until you spent enough time with it to understand it was simply the absence of self-doubt, which was not the same thing. He was tall, well-dressed in a slim burgundy jacket, with close-cropped hair and a jaw that photographed well. He was laughing at something the woman beside him had said. Vivienne Park was exactly as her 400,000 followers had been told she was. She wore a dress that was slightly too occasion-forward for a pre-wedding welcome dinner, and she had the specific posture of someone accustomed to being photographed. She touched Marcus's arm when she laughed, lightly, deliberately, in the way people who have learned to perform affection do it. Marcus looked up. His eyes found Nia with the precision of a man who had been tracking the entrance all evening without appearing to do so. She saw it, the flash of something that was not quite surprise and not quite pleasure, something more like the satisfaction of a person who has been waiting for a specific thing to arrive. Then his eyes moved to Min-jae, and stayed. Nia felt Min-jae's hand settle at the small of her back. Light, certain, the pressure of a man who had decided something. She kept her chin level. Marcus Reed's jaw did something small. Dinner was 15 people around a table that was slightly too long for the room, which meant voices carried and conversations bled into each other at the edges. Nia sat between Min-jae and Camille. Marcus was 6 seats down on the opposite side, close enough for eye contact, far enough that conversation required effort. He made the effort. Midway through the first course, he called across the table, "Nia, I didn't realize you were married." He said it with a smile that was calibrated to sound warm. Camille kept it under wraps. "Camille is good at keeping things where they belong," Nia said. A small beat. A few people looked up. "How long?" he asked. "If you don't mind." 6 months, Nia said. She felt Min-jae's hand move from her back. They were seated now, and settle at the edge of the table, close to hers, not touching, present. 6 months. Marcus nodded slowly, in the way of someone processing information they find interesting. "So, not long after you moved here." "People find what they need when they stop looking for what they lost," Nia said, and she picked up her fork and ate a bite of the soup with complete composure, and she did not look at him again for 4 full minutes. Vivienne Park said something to Marcus in a low voice. He laughed. The sound of it was slightly too loud for the room. Min-jae ate. He spoke when spoken to David about a construction project near Gangnam, to an older couple at the far end who had asked about his work. He described himself as being in private logistics and security consulting. He answered follow-up questions with precisely enough detail to satisfy and precisely little enough to close the topic. At no point did his voice change register or his posture shift in a way that suggested any other conversation in the room was of greater interest than the one he was currently in. But twice, and Nia clocked both times, he turned to her with a specific quality of attention that had nothing to do with performance. Once to pass the water before she'd reached for it. Once to say something quiet near her ear about the fish course, something inconsequential, leaning in the specific way of a man who had been sitting next to the same person long enough to have developed a gravity toward them. She saw Marcus see it the second time. She saw the edge of his smile change. After dinner, the group filtered into the small lounge adjacent to the function room. Someone started music. David got a round of drinks going with the enthusiasm of a man who had waited months for this specific weekend and intended to extract everything it had. Nia was standing with Camille near the window when she heard Marcus behind her. "I'll give you a minute," Camille said, and stepped away before Nia could form the word no. She turned around. Marcus was standing 3 feet away with a drink in his hand and his jacket unbuttoned. Up close, he looked exactly the same and entirely different in the way of something that no longer had power over you but that you still recognize the shape of. "I'm not looking for a conversation," Nia said, keeping her voice below the music. "I'm not either," he said. "I just wanted to say you look well. You look genuinely well. I'm glad." "Thank you." "He seems like a good man." "He is." Marcus turned his glass in his hand once. "I heard you're still at the cafe, the jazz place in Itaewon." "Yes." "You always talked about opening your own place." "Still do." "In Korea?" "Yes." He nodded, looked at his drink. "You know, I've thought a lot about how things—" "Marcus." Her voice was quiet and final. "I don't need you to have thought a lot about anything. I'm fine. You can see that I'm fine. Go back to your table." He looked up. For a second, the performance dropped and she saw something genuine under it, something complicated that she had once spent 2 years trying to understand and had finally stopped trying. He opened his mouth. "There you are." Min-jae's voice arrived first. He stepped up beside Nia. His hand came to the side of her waist, not her back this time, the side, which was different, more specific, more certain, the grip of a man who is claiming something without announcing it. He looked at Marcus without any particular expression, not hostile, not performing warmth either, just present and fully directed. "Marcus Reed," Nia said. "My husband, Min-jae." "David's told me about you," Marcus said, extending his hand. "He says you're in security." "Among other things." Min-jae shook it. His grip, Nia knew from the handshake rehearsal 2 weeks ago, was precisely calibrated, firm without demonstration. The grip of a man who had nothing to prove to this particular person. Marcus held the handshake a half-second too long, which was the handshake of a man trying to take a measurement. He did not appear to like what he measured. "Interesting work," Marcus said. "It has its moments." A beat. Marcus looked at Nia. "Well, congratulations, both of you." He stepped back. "Enjoy the weekend." He walked away. Nia exhaled through her nose, just once. Just enough. Min-jae's hand dropped from her waist. He looked at her. "You're shaking." "I'm aware." "You handled it well." "I've been practicing that conversation in my head for 3 weeks." She looked at the window. The harbor lights were coming on outside, scattered yellow and white across the dark water. "He's going to try again, not tonight, but before the weekend is over." "Yes," Min-jae said. "He will." "What do we do?" He looked out at the harbor. "We give him nothing to work with." They walked back to the hotel at 11:15. The night air off the water was cool and carried salt, and the streets near the waterfront were still busy with people coming out of restaurants and late bars. Sung-wook and Lim Tai-yang materialized at the correct distance behind them without being summoned, which was how the perimeter operated. It existed until it needed to be visible, and until then it was simply the city's normal noise. Nia didn't notice them. She walked with her arms folded across her chest. Not cold exactly, just contained. She'd been mostly quiet since they left the lounge. At the corner of the hotel block, she said, "Thank you for what you did back there." "With Reed?" "With the—" "Yes. You didn't make it a thing. You just showed up and you were just there." She shook her head. "Most people would have made it territorial. Would have wanted him to know you were a threat." "He already knew." "I know he did. That's the point. You didn't have to say it." Min-jae looked at the hotel entrance ahead. Men like Reed understand pressure without speech. The speech is for people who need the confirmation. He doesn't need it. She stopped walking. He took 2 more steps before he noticed and turned back. She was looking at him in the way she sometimes looked at him across the cafe table when he said something that required her to recalibrate some assumption she'd been carrying. He had seen this look before. He had learned not to react to it. "Who are you?" she said. Not confrontational. Something else. Like she was asking a question she'd been holding for 11 months and was finally close enough to the edge to let it out. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. "Someone who came in out of the rain," he said. She looked at him another moment. Then something in her face settled. Not satisfied, not deflected, somewhere in between. She unfolded her arms and walked toward the hotel. He followed. Awesome. In the room, she took the bathroom first. When she came out in a gray oversized sleep shirt and socks, Min-jae was on the sofa with his jacket off and his phone face down on the cushion beside him, his forearms on his knees, looking at nothing. It was the posture of a man doing arithmetic that didn't have a clean answer. She turned out the main light and left the lamp on the far side of the bed. "Min-jae," he looked up. "The sofa is going to hurt your back." "I've slept in worse," you said. She pulled the blanket back on the far side of the bed. "It's a king. There's a geography between us that Marcus Reed couldn't cross with a running start." She got in, lay on her side facing the window. "Turn off the lamp when you're ready." A long quiet. She heard him shift on the sofa, then the sofa creak as he stood. She heard him move across the room and felt the mattress take his weight on the far side. The lamp clicked off. Darkness. The harbor lights filtered through the curtains, faint and pale. "Naya." "Yeah." A pause. "Did he hurt you?" "Reed. When he left." Not the way of a man asking for information. The way of a man asking because the answer mattered to him in some way he had not fully authorized yet. She was quiet for a moment. "He didn't hit me or anything, if that's what you're asking." "That's not what I'm asking." She looked at the pale pattern of light on the ceiling. "He made me feel like I invented the relationship," she said finally. "Like the whole thing was something I built in my head, and he'd just been standing nearby, and I'd projected a love story onto him. By the time he left, I had spent so much time trying to figure out what I'd done wrong that I'd forgotten to ask whether he was actually a good person." She paused. "He wasn't. I don't think he's a bad person either. I think he's a person who loves the version of you that makes him feel good and then loses interest in the rest of it." The room held the quiet. "Some people can love a whole person," Min-jae said. She turned her head slightly. She could not see his face in the dark. "Have you?" A long pause, longer than the others. "Not yet," he said. She lay still. Something in the room had shifted in the way rooms shift when a thing is said that can't be unsaid. Not because it was too much, but because it was exactly the right amount, which is sometimes more destabilizing than excess. She turned back to the window. "Good night, Min-jae." "Good night." The wedding ceremony was held in a garden venue 3 kilometers from the hotel, white chairs under jacaranda trees that had been brought in from somewhere not naturally Busan, and the October sun came through at an angle that turned everything golden and slightly unreal. Nia wore a wine-dark dress, fitted through the shoulders and loose at the hem, and Min-jae walked beside her with his hand lightly at her elbow, and she did not startle this time. They sat in the 4th row. Marcus and Vivian were on the opposite side. 3rd row, close enough that Nia could see Vivian adjusting the position of her phone for a better angle on the altar. David Kwan cried when Camille walked down the aisle. He tried to hide it and couldn't, and the entire 4th row laughed softly and no one said anything about it, and Nia felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. She didn't look at Marcus during the ceremony. She looked at David's face when Camille reached him. She looked at Camille's smile, enormous and unstaged. She looked at the jacaranda leaves moving in a slow wind. She looked once at Min-jae beside her and found him already looking at her. Neither of them said anything. The reception was in the ballroom below the garden, and it was full and loud with warmth, the kind of reception where everyone already knows each other well enough to skip the formal stage and move directly into dancing and long conversations, and somebody telling a story involving a boat that made the whole table fall apart. Min-jae danced with her once during the first open set. He led, which she had not expected, not in the way of someone performing a romance, but in the way of someone who had done this before in situations with genuine stakes and knew exactly where to put his hands and where to put his weight and how to make it look effortless from the outside. She followed, and midway through the song she stopped thinking about whether it looked correct, and it simply was correct, and she caught Camille watching from a table with an expression of pure, unself-conscious delight, and she looked away before she smiled too wide. Marcus watched. She felt it without looking. She didn't look. Afterward, Min-jae went to the bar for water. She was standing at the edge of the dance floor when Vivian Park appeared beside her. "You're Nia," Vivian said. She was shorter up close than she read on camera. Her smile was practiced, and her eyes were running a quick inventory. "I am," Nia said. "Marcus mentioned you." She said it pleasantly, with the neutrality of a woman who has been told just enough to be curious. "He said you two were close." "We were. A long time ago. He has a lot of affection for you." Nia looked at her. She took in the camera-ready posture, the layered meaning in the sentence, the particular mode of a woman who is marking territory she perceives as contested. She felt no anger. She felt something closer to exhaustion. "Vivian," she said, "I'm happily married, and I'm here for my friend's wedding. I don't have any interest in your relationship one way or the other." She paused. "I hope the weekend is good for you both." She walked away. She found Min-jae at the bar and stood beside him and took the glass of water he had ordered for her without being asked and drank half of it. "Vivian Park," she said. "I saw," he said. "She thinks I'm a threat to her." "You are not." "I know." She set down the glass. "I'm not a threat to her. She's not a threat to me. The only person in this room I'm still a little afraid of is Marcus, and not because I want him back. Because he's good at making you doubt the thing you just decided." She looked at Min-jae. "I don't want to doubt it." Min-jae looked at her directly. "Then don't." She held his gaze. "Easy for you to say." "Nothing about you is easy for me," he said, and his voice had dropped to something quieter than a conversation, and she felt it land in her chest before she had time to decide where to put it. The band shifted into something slower. Around them, the reception moved and breathed, and someone at table 9 started laughing at something again. And across the room, Marcus Reed was watching, calculating, still looking for the seam. And Min-jae was looking at Nia, and Nia was looking back. And for the first time since Atlanta, she could not find the wall she normally kept between herself and whatever was standing in front of her. She was still looking for it when Min-jae's phone vibrated in his jacket pocket. He glanced at it. 1 second. Something moved through his face, fast, controlled, but she was close enough and paying enough attention to catch it. Not alarm. Worse than alarm. The specific expression of a man receiving news that changes the geometry of everything he has just decided. He looked up at her, and in his eyes, for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something she could not read at all. "I need to make a call," he said. "Now?" "Now." He set down his glass. 10 minutes. Don't leave the main room." He walked toward the exit with the quality of a man who has just remembered what he actually is, and the distance between him and the door was the distance between the person she had been dancing with 20 minutes ago and the person she had never been allowed to fully see. She stood alone at the edge of the dance floor. The slow song played. She did not know yet that the call was from his consigliere in Seoul. She did not know that somewhere across the city, a rival organization had just made an international offer that would require Min-jae to make a decision before morning. A decision that had nothing to do with the weekend and everything to do with the life he had been quietly, almost imperceptibly, considering leaving behind. She just knew that something had shifted, and that the version of the night she had been living in for the past 4 hours had just ended. Min-jae walked through the service corridor behind the ballroom and pushed through a fire door at the end that opened onto a narrow terrace overlooking the venue's parking structure. The night air was sharper here, away from the heat of the reception, and the music was muffled to something low and structureless. He put the phone to his ear. Park Hyun-soo, his consigliere, picked up on the first ring. Hyun-soo was 51 years old and had been with the Black Phoenix Syndicate for 23 years. He did not call during personal time without cause. Min-jae had received exactly 4 calls from him outside of scheduled contact windows in the past decade, and each one had preceded a significant restructuring of something Min-jae had believed to be stable. "Talk," Min-jae said. "The Meridian Group made contact tonight." Hyunsu's voice was the particular flat of a man delivering information he has already processed and is presenting without editorializing. Not through the usual intermediary directly. Chairman Voss's personal counsel reached out at 9:17. They want to sit down within the week. Min Jae looked at the parking structure below. A valet was moving a white SUV. That's early. By 4 months, yes. A pause. They're not waiting on the Macau groundwork, Min Jae. They've already begun restructuring on their end. The offer on the table is the full international framework, the security corporation, the logistics network, the transition out of current operations, all of it. But the timeline they're proposing is accelerated. They want the first phase complete in 18 months. 18 months is not enough time to dismantle current operations cleanly. No, it is not. Another pause, heavier. There's a second element. Min Jae waited. Voss's counsel asked about personal exposure, specifically. They asked whether you had formed any significant personal attachments in the past year that could create leverage risk. Hyunsu said it the way a doctor says something is going to hurt, accurately and without apology. I told them you were an autonomous professional with no significant attachments. They said they would need confirmation of that before the sit-down. The valet below parked the white SUV and went back for another car. Who told them to ask? Min Jae said. Someone inside shared preliminary intelligence. I don't have a name yet. I will. Hyunsu was quiet for a moment. Min Jae, if there is a significant attachment, if there is a person who can be identified and targeted, the Meridian Group will not proceed. They are building a legitimate enterprise. They cannot absorb a liability of that kind at the foundation level. And your enemies, the ones who would lose the most if the syndicate legitimizes, they will find the liability before Voss does. Min Jae stood very still. The slow song from the ballroom traveled through the walls in a formless vibration. I'll be in Seoul Monday, he said. I'll arrange the sit-down. He hung up. He stood on the terrace for 1 minute and 40 seconds by the watch on his wrist. He counted because counting was something to do with the part of his brain that would otherwise do something less useful. Then he went back inside. Nia was where he'd left her, roughly. She had moved to a table near the far wall with a glass of something amber and was talking to an older couple he didn't recognize. She saw him cross the room, and her expression did the thing it sometimes did. The quick read, the attempt to determine what had changed in him. He had seen her do this before. She was better at it than most. He sat beside her. The older couple excused themselves after another few minutes. When they were gone, Nia turned to him. What happened? Business, he said. You left our friend's wedding reception for 10 minutes to take a business call. Yes. She looked at him. The amber drink turned in her hand once. Is everything okay? Everything is managed, he said, which was not an answer, and they both knew it. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she looked at the dance floor where David was now dancing badly and with great commitment to something upbeat, and Camille was laughing at him, and the room was loud and warm and full of exactly the kind of ordinary happiness that Min Jae had not thought very much about wanting until approximately the past 3 weeks. After this weekend, Nia said, to the dance floor rather than to him, I want to go look at a building. What building? There's a space in Mapo, near the river. I walked past it a month ago and looked it up after. It's been empty for 2 years. The landlord has been holding it for the right tenant. She turned her glass. It's the right size. The bones are good. Big windows on the south face. She paused. I know it's probably too expensive. I know I don't have the capital for it yet, but I want to go look at it. She glanced at him. You could come, if you wanted. Tell me if the bones are actually good or if I'm seeing what I want to see. Min Jae looked at the side of her face. The lamp at the corner table made the gold hoops in her ears catch light. After this weekend, he said. She heard something in it. He watched her hear it. She didn't ask. Team. Sunday morning was checkout, and the brunch Camille had planned in a rooftop restaurant 1 block from the hotel with a view of the harbor going silver under clouds moving in from the west. 12 people at 2 round tables under a retractable awning, eggs and pastries and good coffee, and the specific warm exhaustion of people who have celebrated correctly. Min-jae was quiet through most of it. He answered questions. He was present. He watched Nia across the table talk to Camille with her hands moving in the particular way they moved when she was telling a story. She found funny, and he ate his food and drank his coffee, and he did the specific arithmetic he'd been doing since the terrace the night before. It did not come out differently on the fifth pass than it had on the first. Marcus Reed appeared at the brunch, late, with Vivian, who had a different camera set up today and was photographing the harbor. Marcus settled at the far table and ate with the ease of a man who had recalibrated overnight. He was less focused on Nia. He spoke primarily to the people beside him. Twice he laughed at something genuinely, which was a different laugh than the one from the dinner, less performed. Nia noticed this and said nothing about it, which Min-jae noted. As the brunch ended and people were collecting bags and saying their extended goodbyes on the sidewalk below, Marcus found a moment to stand beside Min-jae at the building entrance while Nia was embracing Camille further down the block. "You're a careful man," Marcus said. He was looking at Nia and Camille rather than at Min-jae. "Most men in my field are." "What field is that exactly?" "Security." Marcus turned his glass of orange juice. "She doesn't know, does she, what you do?" Min-jae looked at him. "What do you think I do, Marcus?" Marcus met his eyes. Up close, there was something in him that was more perceptive than he generally allowed to show, the remnant of a sharper intelligence that had been soft-pedaled in favor of performance. "I think you do something that requires 4 men on a rotating perimeter and a consigliere who calls during wedding receptions." He said it quietly, without aggression. "I think whatever you are is significantly more complicated than security consulting." Min-jae said nothing. "She's a good person," Marcus said. "That's not me being sentimental. It's just true. She deserves a life that doesn't come with invisible men in the corners." He looked back at Nia. "I couldn't give her what she needed. I know that. I'm not trying to get her back. I'm just saying, if you can't give her that life either, it'd be better for her to know it sooner." Min-jae looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Nia, who had turned from Camille and was looking back at him across the distance of the sidewalk with a small, unguarded smile. "Thank you for your perspective," Min-jae said. His voice was pleasant and completely empty. Marcus walked away. Min-jae watched Nia cross the distance toward him, the harbor behind her, the clouds building in from the west. He thought, "She deserves a life that doesn't come with invisible men in the corners." He thought, "Marcus Reed is an idiot about most things and completely correct about this one." The KTX back to Seoul left at 2:15. They sat in the same configuration as before, Nia at the window, Min-jae at the aisle. But the silence this time was a different weight. On the way down, it had been the silence of 2 people moving towards something uncertain but possible. On the way back, it was the silence of a man who had made a decision and had not yet found the specific cruelty required to deliver it. Past Asian, she said, "You've been somewhere else since last night." "I'm here." "You're here. But something else is here too." She looked at her hands in her lap. "You don't have to tell me what the call was about. I know I'm not—" She stopped, restarted. "I know the arrangement. This weekend is the arrangement. We go back to Seoul, and we go back to what we were." She paused. "I just want to know if you're okay." He looked at the seat in front of him. The headrest had a small scuff on it, bottom left corner. From the bag, someone had wrestled into the overhead above it. "I'm okay," he said. She accepted this. She looked back at the window. He looked at her reflection in the glass. He could see her face without turning his head. She was watching the landscape with the expression of a person who is thinking about something specific and has decided not to say it. Her jaw was set in the particular way it set when she was holding something carefully. He thought about the building in Mapo, the south-facing windows, the bones. He thought about Hyun-soo's voice, if there is a person who can be identified and targeted. He thought about the 12 men across 3 organizations who would look at Nia Brooks and see a mechanism for leverage the moment they understood she existed in his life in any capacity that mattered. He thought about his father, who had built the Black Phoenix Syndicate from a street-level debt collection operation in the 90s into a multi-district criminal organization, and who had died at 54 in a hospital room with 3 men guarding the door and no one beside him who had chosen to be there without compensation. His father had, Min-jae knew, loved a woman once. She had disappeared when Min-jae was 4 years old. He had never been told why. He had understood why, eventually, on his own. Chesit. They arrived back in Seoul at 4:40. His car was at the station. Sungwook drove. Nia sat in the back beside Min-jae and looked at the city coming back around them, Han River visible from the elevated stretch of road, the city enormous and indifferent and bright in the late afternoon. Mapo, he said. She looked at him. The building. Let's go look at it. She held her overnight bag on her lap. Then she said, Now? We're 20 minutes from Mapo. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he had learned to recognize as the one she wore when she was deciding whether to let herself want something. Then she looked at the river. Yeah, she said. Okay. The building was on a side street 2 blocks from the river, a 3-story former print shop with large industrial windows along the south face and a ground floor that was empty and slightly cold from disuse. The landlord was not there. Min-jae had not called ahead. He simply stood on the sidewalk in front of it with Nia beside him and looked at it. She was quiet for a long time. The windows, she said. South-facing. Good light until 4 in winter. The ground floor is wide enough for a counter on one side and tables on the other with room to move between them. She stepped toward the glass and shaded her eyes to look in. The ceiling's high. You could put pendant lights on long drops. It'd feel warm instead of clinical. He stood beside her and looked through the glass. The empty room, the dusty floor, the shape of something that did not yet exist. There's a kitchen space at the back, she said. You can see the pass-through window. She pressed her hand flat on the glass. It's everything I described. It's almost exactly... She stopped. Her voice had gone somewhere tight. She took her hand off the glass and stepped back. It's the right building. Yes, he said. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were wet at the corners, not from sadness, from the specific emotion of seeing a thing you've been carrying in your head for a long time, suddenly rendered real and present and touchable. I can't afford it yet, she said. But I can't. I'm going to remember standing here. She exhaled. Thank you for coming to look at it with me. He looked at her. He thought, I could own this building by Monday morning. He said, You'll get there. She nodded. She looked at the building one more time. Then she pulled her coat tighter and turned back toward the car, and he walked beside her, and the 2 blocks back to the car were the longest 2 blocks of the past decade. He made his decision that night. Alone, in his apartment on the 38th floor in Yongsan, sitting at the desk where he managed the architecture of his professional life, looking at the Han River below him. Same river, different angle. He thought about that for a moment, and then he stopped thinking about it. He called Hyun-soo at 11. Sit down, he said. Arrange it. Good. And the other matter? He was quiet for 3 seconds. Handle it, he said. Whatever they need to confirm. Understood. He hung up. He sat for another hour at the desk without moving. This was not unusual. He had made harder decisions and sat with them the same way. The sitting was part of it. The stillness was the processing. He had learned early that men who couldn't sit still with their own decisions made bad ones. He looked at the river. He did not call Naya. What he did not know, at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night, was that Nia was not asleep. She was sitting at her kitchen table in her apartment in Mapo, 15 minutes from the building with the south-facing windows, with a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink, looking at nothing in particular. She had been sitting there since she got home. Her overnight bag was still by the door. She had not unpacked it. She was thinking about the terrace call she had not been told about. She was thinking about the way his face had changed when he came back in. She was thinking about the specific quality of the quiet on the train back, which was not the quiet of a man who was tired or satisfied or simply done talking. It was the quiet of a man with something between his ribs that he was keeping there by deliberate force. She was thinking about Marcus, which she had not expected to be doing. Not with longing, with the particular utility of someone who had known her long enough to still read the correct shape of certain things, even if he'd been wrong about most of them. She was thinking about what Marcus had said to her at the brunch very quickly while Min-jae was near the entrance. He had leaned close and said in a low voice, "He's good at protecting people. Make sure he's not protecting you from himself." She had not responded. She had looked at Marcus for 1 second with the look she reserved for things she wasn't ready to examine, and then Camille had called her name and she had turned away. She was examining it now. She picked up her phone. She looked at Min Jae's contact. No photograph, just the name, which she had entered 6 months ago at his request. Simply MJ, which told her nothing and suited him entirely. She did not call. She set the phone face down. She thought about the building, about him standing in front of it saying, "You'll get there," in the voice of a man who knows the distance to a destination and is not going to be walking it beside you. She thought, something happened on that terrace. She thought, he's already decided something. She thought, I need to know what it is before I let this go any further. She turned the cup of cold tea in her hands and sat at the kitchen table in Mapo, while the city moved outside her window, and she did not yet understand that the thing she was already feeling, the specific anticipatory grief of a loss not yet confirmed, was the most honest thing she had felt in 2 years. 3 days passed in which they did not see each other. This was not unusual in practical terms. They were not in the habit of daily contact. Their arrangement was Thursday nights at Blue Fern, and it was Tuesday. But the 3 days had a texture to them that was different. On Monday, Min Jae met with Hyun Soo and 2 legal consultants at the syndicate's operations office in Gangnam, in a room with no windows and a table that had seen worse meetings than this one. The Meridian Group's framework was laid out in 4 documents totaling 89 pages. The timeline was aggressive. The transition would require Min Jae's full operational attention for a minimum of 2 years. It would require him to travel extensively. It would require that every visible aspect of his personal life be unimpeachable and every invisible aspect of it remain buried. He read all 89 pages. He asked 22 questions. He got 18 answers. The 4 missing answers were not, he understood, going to improve. On Tuesday, Nia worked a double shift at Blue Fern. She took an order for a table of 4 and wrote it down in her enormous handwriting and brought it correctly and refilled water glasses without being asked, and smiled at the right moments, and at 9:15, when the cafe had thinned to a few late couples, she stood at the service window and thought about something without meaning to. She thought about the way he had looked at her on the dance floor in Busan. Not the performance of it. The thing that was underneath it, which she had been trying to not think about directly, because looking at it directly had the quality of looking into a light source, briefly illuminating and then producing a specific blindness. She thought about not yet. On Wednesday, Min Jae's intelligence team confirmed the identity of the internal source who had communicated his personal status to the Meridian Group's preliminary assessment team. The source was a mid-level logistics coordinator named Baek Jun-ho, who had been with the organization 4 years and had apparently been developing a secondary relationship with a competing interest group for the past 8 months. Hyun-soo managed the situation. By Wednesday evening, the situation was managed. Min Jae did not feel anything specific about this, which was normal. He had made his peace with the operational necessities of his life at 24 and had not revisited the peace since. What he felt instead, at 7 o'clock on Wednesday evening, sitting in the back of his car on the way back from Gangnam, was the specific image of Nia's hand flat against a glass storefront. Not the image of her face, just her hand, palm flat, fingers spread. The posture of someone making contact with something they're afraid to fully want. He turned his phone over in his hands. He did not call. What? Thursday came. He was there at 7:15, on time. He hung his jacket on the hook at the end of the booth and sat with his back to the wall and looked at the menu he did not need. Nia came out of the kitchen at 7:18. She saw him. She came to the table with the water, same as always, and set it down, same as always. She did not sit. Same as always, she said. Yes, she wrote it down. She did not look at the notepad while she wrote. She looked at him. You've decided something, she said. Her voice was flat. Not cold, flat. The specific flatness of a person who has been preparing a sentence for 3 days and has stripped everything performative out of it. He looked up from the menu. Naya, you don't have to tell me what it is. She put the pen back above her ear. But I need to know if I'm misreading it, because if I'm misreading it, I can just... She pressed her lips together. I can just go back to Thursday nights and soup recommendations, and that's fine. That's what this was. That's what I agreed to. She paused. But if I'm not misreading it, then I need you to say so. Because I am 30 years old and I cannot spend another 2 years not knowing. The cafe was quiet. The trumpet player was not there tonight. The pianist played something soft and single-handed. Min Jae looked at her. He thought about the 89 pages. He thought about the 12 men who would see her as a mechanism. He thought about his father's apartment, which had contained, when Min Jae cleaned it out at 22, exactly 0 evidence that any person had ever chosen to be inside it for a reason that wasn't professional. He thought, if I tell her the truth, she will make herself smaller to accommodate it. She will tell me it's fine. She will go back to Thursday nights and soup recommendations because she has already learned from Marcus Reed and from 2 years of making herself small for a person who didn't deserve it, how to subtract herself from her own story. He thought, I will not be another person she subtracts herself for. He said, you're not misreading it. She went very still. But there are things about my life. He stopped. He started again because he would not do this halfway. I work in operations that are complicated in ways that cannot be simplified for a conversation in a cafe. Those operations create risks, specific, targeted risks, for people who are visible in my life. He held her gaze. You are not safe, Nia, in the way you deserve to be safe if you are close to me. She looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw worked once. Then she said, is that your decision to make for me? It's the decision I'm making. She set the order notepad on the table. She set the pen beside it. She put both hands flat on the table like she needed something solid. So what you're saying is that what happened this weekend was real, he said. That is not the problem. Then what is? The problem is that real is not enough, not against what comes with me. He looked at her hands on the table, flat and still, the same as against the glass. You deserve the building, Nia. The windows and the pendant lights and the customers who don't know who you are to me. You deserve all of it without someone in the corners watching for threats. The pianist hit a wrong chord and corrected it. Nia did not move for 4 seconds. Then she picked up the notepad and the pen. She straightened up. Her face had done something that was the opposite of what he'd seen on the dance floor. Something closing, carefully, from the inside. The way a well-built door closes. Not slamming. Pulling shut with the specific quiet of something well-made and final. You know, she said, and her voice was very controlled, very even. For someone who's been reading me correctly for 11 months, you just got something very wrong. Nia, your food will be ready in 15 minutes. She walked back to the kitchen. The door swung behind her. The pianist continued playing. At the bar, a couple who had not heard anything leaned toward each other over their drinks. Minji sat alone in the booth with his back to the wall. He was still sitting there, 7 minutes later, when Naya came back out of the kitchen, not toward his table, but toward the service station at the far end, and he could see from where he sat that her face was composed and professional, and that she was doing what she had probably done 100 times before, managing the inside of herself with the same competence she managed everything else. When he saw her reach for a glass with one hand, miss it, catch the edge of it instead, and hold the counter with both hands for just a moment, just one moment. Then she straightened, picked up the glass correctly, and went back to work. Min Jae looked at the table. He had spent 20 years making decisions that cost people things. He had made them with clarity and without sentiment, and in the knowledge that sentimentality was the luxury of men who did not bear the weight he bore. He had believed this completely. He believed it slightly less at this particular moment than he had at any previous moment in the past 20 years, which was not useful and was not actionable and did not change a single variable in the 89 pages sitting on his desk in Yongsan. He ate the food when it came, because not eating it would have been a different kind of statement. He left the correct amount on the table. He put on his jacket. He walked out of Blue Fern Jazz Cafe into the Itaewon night without looking back, which was the only way he knew how to leave anything, and the door swung shut behind him, and the pianist inside moved into something that was almost, but not quite, the song they had danced to in Busan. Sung-wook fell into step behind him on the pavement. Somewhere behind the cafe's kitchen door, Nia Brooks set down a tray she had picked up for no reason and pressed her back against the wall and looked at the ceiling of the kitchen while Chef Yoon pretended not to notice, and she stayed there for exactly long enough to understand that she had, without ever intending to, walked straight back into the exact shape of the thing she had come to Seoul to escape. Except that this time, with this man, she had not been deceived. She had simply loved someone who decided, for her, that she couldn't afford the cost of it. She pushed off the wall. She picked up the tray. She went back to work, and Min Jae's plane to the first of his restructuring meetings was booked for the following Tuesday, and neither of them knew yet that the lie Nia would tell herself in the coming days, that she had never truly loved him, that the weekend had been a performance from start to finish, that he had simply been the right man for a difficult occasion, would be the most costly untruth either of them had ever spoken, and that it would travel across an ocean and take up residence in the silence between everything that came after. 6 weeks passed. Seoul moved through them the way Seoul moved through everything, loud and lit and indifferent to individual grief. The Han River kept going, the subway ran. The neon in Itaewon buzzed on Thursday nights, the same way it buzzed every other night. And Blue Fern Jazz Cafe opened at 6 and closed at midnight, and Nia Brooks worked her shifts and wrote orders in her enormous handwriting and smiled the professional smile in refilled water glasses and did not look at the door at 7:15. She looked at the door at 7:17, sometimes. Old habit. She was working on it. The lie she had told herself in the kitchen that Thursday night had done what lies do when you tend them carefully. It had grown a surface. Not a deep one, but enough to function on. She told herself it had been a performance. She told herself the weekend in Busan had been exactly what she'd contracted it to be. She told herself the specific weight of sleeping 6 inches from him in a dark hotel room and hearing him say, "Not yet," was simply the occupational hazard of a convincing arrangement, and that the building in Mapo and the south-facing windows and the way he had stood beside her with his hand flat on the glass were details she had assigned too much meaning to because she was 30 years old and she was lonely in a country that was not hers, and sometimes loneliness wore the shape of something else. She told herself this with the same discipline she brought to everything. It mostly worked between 6 in the morning and 11 at night. The hours between 11 and 6 were less managed. She called her sister in Atlanta twice, talked about work, talked about Camille's post-wedding glow, talked about a new espresso supplier the cafe had switched to and whether the beans were actually better or whether she was just adjusting. She did not mention Min Jae. Her sister did not ask. Her sister had learned, in 30 years, that when Nia didn't mention something, it was because it was the only thing she was thinking about. On the 5th week, Marcus Reed sent her a message on her phone. Not through Camille, directly. He had her number from before, from Atlanta, and it occurred to her that she had never removed him from her contacts, which she found irritating about herself. The message said, "I know it ended. I'm not asking about that. I just wanted to say the weekend in Busan. You seem genuinely happy. I hope that's still true. That's all." She stared at it for 3 minutes. She did not reply. She set the phone face down on the counter and stood at her kitchen window and looked at the street below and thought about the word genuinely and how it was doing all the work in that sentence, and how Marcus Reed, who was wrong about most things, had been present in that ballroom and had watched something that she had been trying to convince herself was not there, and he was right that it had been genuine, and she hated that he was right, and she hated more that it didn't matter, because genuine was not the word that had walked out of Blue Fern at 9:45 on a Thursday night and not looked back. Min Jae was in Vienna for 11 days, then Zurich for 6, then a week back in Seoul where he sat in 3 different rooms across 4 days and worked through the first phase of the Meridian Group framework with the specific focused endurance of a man who had nothing pressing pulling his attention in another direction. Hyun-soo watched him work and said nothing for most of it. On the 4th day, at the end of a long session reviewing the logistics network transition, Hyun-soo set a folder on the table in front of him. "There's something you should see." Min Jae looked at it. He did not open it immediately. "What is it?" "Background intelligence, generated as part of the standard perimeter review on active personal interests." A pause. "She's still there, Min Jae. Blue Fern, double shifts on Wednesdays now. She applied for a small business development consultation through the Seoul Commerce Office 3 weeks ago. She's building toward the cafe." Min Jae looked at the folder. "Why are you showing me this?" Hyun-soo sat down across from him. In 23 years, he had sat across from Min Jae in many configurations. This one was different from the professional ones. He sat the way a man sits when he is about to say something that exceeds his job description and has decided to say it anyway. Because the perimeter review also flagged contact, Marcus Reed sent her a message 18 days ago. Min Jae's eyes came up. She didn't reply, Hyun-soo said. But it was flagged because he's been in Seoul for 2 weeks. He extended his stay after the wedding. The stated reason is a consulting contract. The actual pattern suggests he's been in Itaewon 4 times in that period. The room was quiet. He hasn't approached her, Hyun-soo said. Not yet, but he's close enough to the pattern that the flag is appropriate. He paused. I'm not telling you this to interfere with your decision. I'm telling you because it's operational information and you pay me to give you operational information. He paused once more. And because I've known you for 23 years, and I have never once seen you make a decision in November that you weren't second-guessing by December. And this one is Hyun-soo. This one is the December of most of your life. Silence. Min Jae looked at the table. The folder sat there, unopened. The framework requires clean personal exposure. The framework requires that your vulnerabilities not be exploitable by hostile parties, Hyun-soo said. That's not the same thing as having no one. It's close enough. It is not. Hyun-soo's voice was the flattest Min Jae had heard it outside of a crisis. A woman who is hidden and protected is not a liability. A woman who is alone and visible and does not know why you left is a different calculation entirely. She is not protected now, Min Jae. She is simply not yours. Min Jae said nothing. Hyun-soo stood up. The next phase meeting is Thursday. He left the folder on the table. Read what's in there or don't, but you should know that Lim Tae-yang has been running an informal watch on the Itaewon radius since you left. Off the books. I didn't ask him to. He did it on his own. He moved toward the door. Men don't do things off the books for people they're indifferent to. He left. Min Jae sat alone in the room. He looked at the folder for a long time. He opened it. Marcus Reed had been in Seoul for 19 days. The consulting contract was real, 3 days a week, with a mid-sized lifestyle brand in Gangnam looking to expand their digital presence. The rest of the time was less accounted for. He had a serviced apartment in Yongsan. He ran in the mornings along the river path. He ate dinner alone most nights at a rotation of restaurants in Itaewon and Hanam-dong, which put him within a kilometer of Blue Fern on 4 of the past 14 evenings. This was the information in the folder. There was also a photograph, time-stamped, taken from a distance through a cafe window. Nia at a table near the back, on what appeared to be a break, a coffee in her hand, looking at something on her phone with the particular expression of someone reading something twice because the first reading didn't produce the right feeling. The timestamp was 3 weeks ago, the day after Marcus's message. Min Jae closed the folder. He sat with his hands flat on the table and he breathed at the rate of a man who is not panicking because he has decided not to, which is a different thing from a man who has nothing to panic about. He thought, she is not protected. He thought, Hyun-soo is correct that those are different calculations. He thought, the 89 pages do not change. He thought, Marcus Reed is in Seoul, and he is circling, and he is a manipulator who is good at finding the exact word to make a person doubt the thing they just decided, and the thing Nia just decided, the thing she had been deciding for 6 weeks alone in an apartment in Mapo, was that it had not been real. And if Marcus Reed was allowed to get close enough to dismantle that particular lie before she had built something real to replace it, she would not end up back with Marcus Reed. She would end up more alone than before, because the specific mathematics of being told by 2 consecutive men that you are either not worth staying for or not safe enough to keep would do to a person what 2 years of salt water does to good timber. He pushed back from the table. He stood up. He looked at the Han River through the window. Sung-wook, he said, loud enough to carry to the hall. The door opened. Get the car. He did not go to Blue Fern. He went to Marcus Reed's serviced apartment building in Yongsan first, which was not a decision he had consciously made, only the one his body apparently made on his behalf, and he was in the elevator going up before he fully assessed whether this was the correct sequence. It was not the correct sequence. He got back in the elevator. He sat in the car for 4 minutes outside the building with Sung-wook not saying anything in the front seat, which was Sung-wook's professional specialty. Then he said, "Blue Fern," and Sung-wook pulled out into traffic. It was a Wednesday. She was working the double. He knew this because the folder had contained her current schedule, which Lim Tae-yang had tracked as part of the informal perimeter. And he was going to have to do something about the fact that Lim had been maintaining a personal security operation without authorization, which would require a specific kind of acknowledgement that did not involve punishment. Because what Lim had done was correct, even if it was unsanctioned. He would deal with that separately. It was 8:40 when the car stopped on the block before Blue Fern. He walked the last half block alone. Sung-wook stayed at the car. The night was cold, colder than the night in Busan, a November cold with real edge to it, and the neon from the street made the wet pavement look like something you'd see in a photograph rather than walk through. He stopped. Across the street, 20 meters from the cafe entrance, Marcus Reed was standing on the pavement. He was not going in. He was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets and looking at the lit window of Blue Fern with an expression that Min-jae could read from the distance without difficulty. It was the expression of a man who has been circling a decision for weeks, and tonight has run out of road to circle on. Min-jae stood still. He watched Marcus take his hands out of his pockets, square his shoulders, start across the street toward the cafe. Min-jae moved. He crossed at the corner, faster than a walk, not running, and he came around the front of the cafe the same moment Marcus reached the door, and Marcus turned at the sound of approach and stopped. They stood 4 feet apart on the pavement outside Blue Fern. Marcus looked at him. His face did the rapid calculation of a man encountering something he knew was theoretically possible and had not fully prepared for. Min-jae. Marcus. Silence. The trumpet inside the cafe played something high and unresolved. "I was just going to," Marcus started. "I know what you were going to do," Min-jae said. His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that has more pressure in it than volume. "You were going to go in, and you were going to sit in her section, and you were going to find the right moment to say the exact thing that would make her feel like the last 6 weeks confirmed what you've been waiting to confirm, that she's still available, that whatever she had was temporary and uncertain, that she might as well start over with someone familiar." He held Marcus's gaze. "You are very good at reading people, but you read her wrong." Marcus stood still. There was something in his face that was not hostile, something more honest than that, which Min-jae had not expected, and which was more difficult to respond to than hostility would have been. "She's not yours anymore," Marcus said. "You left." "I know I left." "Then what are you doing here?" Min-jae had no clean answer for this. He was standing outside a jazz cafe at 8:40 on a Wednesday in November because a folder of surveillance photographs had produced in him a specific variety of something he did not have better language for than wrong, and wrong had turned out to be more actionable than most things he'd encountered in a decade of operational decision-making. "I am correcting an error," he said. Marcus looked at him for a long moment, looked at the cafe door, looked back. "She told Camille it wasn't real, the marriage. She said she hired you for the weekend." "I know what she said." "She believes it." "I know what she believes." Marcus exhaled. It was the exhale of a man releasing something heavy, and Min-jae recognized it as genuine in a way that revised, slightly, his prior assessment of Marcus Reed. Not upward, exactly, but toward complicated. "She deserves someone who stays," Marcus said. "Yes," Min-jae said. "She does." Marcus looked at him once more. Then he stepped back. He put his hands back in his pockets. He looked at the cafe window for a moment. The warm amber of it, the movement inside, the glimpse of the jazz trio in the corner. And then he turned and walked back down the block and did not look back. Min-jae stood on the pavement alone. He looked at the cafe door. His pulse was doing something specific in his throat. Not fear. He was familiar enough with fear to know its texture. This was something adjacent to it. The particular physiological condition of standing at the edge of something that cannot be undone once you step off it, and knowing that you are about to step. He pushed the door open. Huang. The cafe was two-thirds full. The jazz trio was in the second half of a set. The pianist and the bassist in agreement for once. The trumpet player actually landing his notes. The amber light did the thing it did to everyone in the room, made them look slightly warmer and more significant than they probably felt. Nia was at the far end of the room, collecting empty glasses from a table of 3 who were pulling on their coats to leave. She had her back to the door. Min-jae stood at the entrance. Sung-wook, who had followed at a distance Min-jae had not specified and did not need to, stopped outside. Nia said something to the table of 3. One of them laughed. She straightened up with the tray and turned back toward the service station and stopped. She had seen him. The distance between them was 20 feet. The room was between them. 3 occupied tables, the service station, the particular air of a place that had not changed since he'd walked out of it 6 weeks ago. She held the tray at her side and looked at him, and her face did not do the professional thing. It did the real thing instead, which was complicated and fast and went through several expressions in 2 seconds, none of them small. Then she turned back to the service station and set the tray down. He crossed the room. She had her back to him when he reached the service station. She was straightening glasses that did not need to be straightened. Her hands were moving carefully. He could see from the set of her shoulders that she was doing the inside management, pulling the door closed. "Nia," he said. "We're full tonight," she said. "I don't have your table. I'm not here for the table. I know why you're here." Her voice was flat in the specific way it had been on that last Thursday, the flatness that was controlled rather than cold. She turned around. Her eyes were direct, and the red was already at the inner corners. "You don't get to do this." "I know. You don't get to leave and then come back when you've decided you've thought about it enough. I am not a—" She stopped. Her jaw worked. "I told Camille it was fake. I told myself it was fake. I've been telling everyone who matters, including me, that the whole thing was a transaction, and it was almost working." Her voice cracked on the last word slightly, and she pressed her lips together hard. "It was almost working, Min-jae." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." "You don't get to be sorry either." "Nia—" What changed? Her voice dropped. The room was not listening. The jazz covered them. But she spoke low anyway, with the specific force of a person who has no remaining energy for performance. "What changed between 6 weeks ago and tonight? Because whatever you told yourself when you walked out of here, it's still true. Your life is still your life. You made a decision. It was—" She stopped again. Her hand gripped the edge of the service station. "It was the right decision. I understand the logic of it. I do." She looked at him. "So what changed?" He looked at her hand on the service station, the knuckles, the grip of someone holding on. "Nothing changed," he said. "The 89 pages are the same, the restructuring is the same, the risk is the same." He held her gaze. "None of it changed. I came back because I made a decision for you without asking you, and that was wrong. And before I decide anything else, I need you to have the whole truth, and I need to know if, after you have it, you still want the distance." She stared at him. "The whole truth," she said slowly. "Everything." He held her gaze without flinching. "What I am, what the syndicate is, what the restructuring means, what the risk is, all of it. The truth you've been circling for 11 months without asking because you decided some answers came at a cost you weren't ready to pay." He paused. "I need you to know the real cost, not the one I calculated for you." The room breathed around them. The pianist hit a chord that sustained low and rich, and the bassist came in underneath it, and the whole thing settled into something almost unbearably patient. Nia looked at him for a long time, long enough that the table she'd just cleared had been reset by the bus runner, and the door had opened and closed twice for new customers, and Chef Yoon had glanced through the kitchen, passed through window once, and then carefully looked somewhere else. Then she said, very quietly, "My shift ends at 11. He exhaled. "You can wait at the bar," she said. "If you want." "I'll wait." She picked up the tray. Her face was not the professional face, and it was not the real face either. It was something he had not seen before, something in between, the face of a person who has not yet decided whether to be glad. She turned back toward the tables. Min-jae. He stopped. She didn't turn around. If you leave before 11, don't come back. I won't leave, he said. She walked toward the tables. He went to the bar. He sat on the end stool with his back angled so he could see both exits and the kitchen door, because some things were deeper than intention, and he put his hands on the bar, and he breathed. 2 hours and 14 minutes. He would sit here for 2 hours and 14 minutes, and then she would come out of the kitchen with her coat on and her bag over her shoulder, and he would stand up, and they would walk out into the November cold, and he would tell her the truth about what he was and what he'd built and what he was building it into, and exactly what it meant and what it didn't mean, and what he believed was possible if she was the one making the decision and not him. That was the plan. He was, at 9:47 on a Wednesday night, sitting at the bar of a jazz cafe in Itaewon with his hands on the wood and his heart doing something in his chest that he could not reduce to a function or a strategy, when his phone vibrated. He looked at it. Hyun-soo. Not a call. A message. 4 words. Baek Jun-ho talked. Move. Min-jae's hand closed around the phone. His eyes went to Naya across the room, her back to him, leaning over a table with her notepad, writing something in her enormous handwriting, laughing at something a customer said with the real laugh, the one with the gap in it. His other hand was already on the bar's edge, because Baek Jun-ho talking meant that the information he had carried about Min-jae's personal exposure, the information that had been managed 6 weeks ago, had not been fully contained. It meant that somewhere between the management and now, something had been communicated to someone who should not have received it. It meant that the 12 men who would look at Naya Brooks and see a mechanism had been given something to look at. It meant that the 2 hours and 14 minutes he had planned to wait at this bar had just become a different number. It meant that tonight, every variable he had spent 6 weeks holding in careful isolation was about to arrive in the same room. He was already standing when Sung-wook came through the door. Sung-wook came through the door without running, which was how Min-jae knew it was serious. Men who ran announced the emergency before they could manage it. Sung-wook crossed the cafe floor in 12 steps, with his face arranged the same way it always was, and stopped at the bar and leaned in close enough that his voice reached Min-jae and no one else. Baek gave them the Itaewon connection. They've had someone on the block for the past 3 nights. Tonight there are 2. Min-jae did not look at Sung-wook. He looked at the bar top. Nia. She's not the target. You are. But if they move on you here, she's in the room. He set the phone face down. Where is Lim? Outside already, east end of the block. The 2 on the block, who sent them? Choi faction, remnant operation. They've been quiet since the restructuring announcement, but Baek's information gave them a specific window. Sung-wook paused. They're not authorized to act inside a public venue. They're waiting for you to come out. Min-jae turned his head slightly and looked at the room. Nia was at the far table, still laughing at whatever the customer had said, her pen in her hand. Chef Yoon visible through the kitchen pass-through. The jazz trio at the quarter mark of what sounded like a long, slow song. 12 other people in the room who had come to drink and listen to music and who had no relationship to anything that was about to happen on the block outside. He turned back to Sung-wook. How long before the kitchen closes? 40 minutes. Get her out through the kitchen, service exit on the east alley. Lim takes her to the Mappo apartment and stays on the door. He picked up the phone. Tell Chef Yoon there's a gas concern in the main line and the kitchen needs to close early. He'll clear the back without a scene. And you? I'll go out the front. Sung-wook's face did not change. That's not a plan. That's a presentation. It's a controlled environment. 2 men on a block who are not authorized to act inside a public space. If I give them a clean window on the pavement, they'll take the approach before they escalate, and then we have a conversation instead of an incident. He met Sung-wook's eyes. I need a conversation, not an incident. Min-jae. She doesn't leave this building scared. She doesn't leave it knowing what's happening outside. He held Sung-wook's gaze. That's not negotiable. A pause. Sung-wook understood this the way he understood most things. Not with approval, not with argument, but with the complete professional acceptance of a man who had long ago stopped expecting the people he worked for to make the choices that optimized cleanly for their own safety. He straightened up. 15 minutes. 12, Min-jae said. Sung-wook went toward the kitchen. Min-jae sat at the bar for 90 seconds. He sat with the specific stillness he used in rooms where stillness was the only thing that kept the geometry manageable. He looked at the mirror behind the bar and found Nia in the reflection. Still at the far table, now finishing up, collecting the check holder. And he looked at her for the 90 seconds with the deliberate intention of a man storing something against a future he was not certain about. Then he stood up. He buttoned his jacket, he looked at the door. He walked out of Blue Fern Jazz Cafe into the November night and pulled the door closed behind him. The cold hit him cleanly, and he let it. The pavement was still wet from earlier rain, the neon running in long colored streaks toward the gutter. He stood on the step for a moment, visible, unhurried, and scanned the block the way he had scanned rooms for 20 years, left to right, near to far, noting the two shapes that were not behaving like the other shapes. One near the Pojangmacha cart 30 meters east, one in the doorway of a closed clothing store 20 meters west. Both men were dressed for the cold in dark coats, and both men were looking at their phones with the specific determination of people performing a task that requires them to appear not to be performing a task. Min-jae stepped off the step and walked east. He gave them time to recognize him, which took 4 seconds, and then to communicate, which took another 3. And then the man near the Pojangmacha cart stepped away from it and moved to intercept, and the man from the western doorway began moving too, and they converged on the pavement in front of a shuttered pharmacy, and Min-jae stopped walking and turned to face them. The first man was broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped hair, and a face that had been rearranged at some point in the past by something hard. He stopped 2 meters away. The second man positioned himself at Min-jae's left, at the edge of the available light. Classic containment. 2 points, offset angle, textbook. Kang Min-jae, the first man said. Not a question. Yes. Chairman Choi sends his regards. The first man's hands were at his sides, not in his pockets. Visible. Which meant the message tonight was precisely a message and not yet an action, which was consistent with what Sung-wook had said, and which meant Min-jae had read the situation correctly on the inside. He's concerned about the pace of the restructuring announcement. He believes it was premature. He believes certain parties were not appropriately consulted before the timeline was made public. Chairman Choi had 2 channels through which to communicate that concern, Min-jae said. He used neither of them. He sent you instead. On a public block. On a Wednesday night. He let a pause go by. That tells me he's not concerned about the timeline. He's concerned about what the timeline means for his specific revenue structures once the transition completes, which is a different conversation. The first man's jaw shifted slightly. He wants a sit-down. He can call Hyun-soo and schedule one. He wants assurance first, that the transition preserves existing arrangements. Existing arrangements, Min-jae said, are the thing being transitioned out of. Chairman Choi knows this. He knew it before the announcement. He had the same briefing documents every other party received. He looked at the first man directly. Go back and tell him that sending 2 men to a public block in Itaewon to intercept me outside a civilian venue has cost him the goodwill he would have received if he had used the phone. Tell him the sit-down is still available. Tell him the terms of the transition are not. The first man and the second man exchanged something without moving their faces, the communication of people who have worked together long enough to talk without words. Then the first man took a step forward. Min-jae did not step back. The man stopped. From the east end of the block, Lim Tae-yong stepped into the light under the street lamp. He did not move further. He simply stood there in the available light, visible, his hands at his sides, which was all that was required. The first man looked at Lim, then back at Min-jae, then at the second man. The second man looked at the pavement. The chairman will be in contact, the first man said. Through the correct channel, Min-jae said. They left. Not fast. Measured. The specific departure of men who are preserving the performance of having chosen to leave. Min-jae watched them until they reached the corner and turned it. He breathed through his nose. His pulse, which had held itself at a controlled rate through the entire exchange, came down 1 register. He turned around. Nia Brooks was standing on the step outside Blue Fern. She had her coat on and her bag over her shoulder, and she was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before, which was a significant statement given how carefully he had been cataloging her expressions for 11 months. It was not the anger he'd expected. It was not the fear. It was the look of someone who has just seen something confirmed that they had been telling themselves was not there. He walked back to her. She waited until he was close enough to speak quietly. Chef Yoon told me there was a gas issue in the kitchen, she said. There was no gas issue in the kitchen. No. Those men are gone. Were they here because of you? He looked at her. The amber light from the cafe window fell across the side of her face. Her eyes were steady, not trembling, not performing composure, actually steady, which was its own kind of extraordinary thing given what she had just watched from the step. Yes, he said. She absorbed this. She looked at the corner where they'd gone. Are you hurt? No. Are you going to be? No. It was a message. It's been received. She looked back at him. Her breath made small clouds in the November cold. She was quiet for a moment, not the managed quiet of the service station, but the quiet of someone genuinely processing. What are you? She said. Actually, he held her gaze. He had told her at the bar that he was going to give her the whole truth. He had planned to do it in a warmer room with more time and less adrenaline still moving through his system. He did it here instead, on the cold pavement, because she was already standing in the truth of it and waiting for the words to catch up. The Black Phoenix Syndicate, he said. I inherited it at 22. My father built it. I ran it for a decade. He kept his voice even. Criminal operations, debt enforcement, territory management, contracts with people who could not use legitimate legal structures. I am in the process of dismantling every part of that and restructuring what remains into a legitimate security and logistics corporation. That process takes time. While it is incomplete, people who lose income from the restructuring will continue to apply pressure. He paused. Those men were that pressure. They were a message from a faction leader who stands to lose a significant revenue structure when the transition completes. The message has been managed. It will not come again in this form. The words sat in the cold air between them. Nia looked at him. She did not look away and she did not step back, and he watched her face move through something that was not simple. Not the clean shock of a person hearing a thing they never suspected, but the complicated reckoning of a person hearing confirmed the thing they had been half knowing for 11 months, and had been carefully not knowing because the not knowing was the only way to keep Thursday nights functional. The bodyguards, she said. Yes. The way rooms change when you walk in. Yes. That phone call in Busan. Yes. She looked at the block. The wet pavement, the neon, the city that had been going around her life in Seoul for 14 months, ordinary and enormous and containing, apparently, this. That night at the cafe, she said, when you first came in, that was after a meeting. Yes. He did not soften it. He had promised the whole truth. I was keyed up. I needed something that wasn't what I'd just been doing. I walked past the window and came in. And then you kept coming. Yes. She looked at her shoes for a moment, then at the sky, which was overcast and city-lit and orange at the edges, then at him. The Meridian Group, she said. The restructuring offer. That was the call in Busan. He paused. Yes. How did you? Marcus. He said you were in security. Then he said something about a consigliere. She looked at him evenly. I'm not unintelligent. I never thought you were. You thought I needed protecting. I thought you deserved better than what being close to me costs. You thought that was your decision. Her voice had an edge now. Not a hot edge. A cold one. The edge of someone who has been decided for before and knows exactly what it feels like. You did the same thing Marcus did. You just had cleaner reasons. That landed. He did not deflect it. Yes, he said. You're right. She stared at him. The cold edge held for a moment. Then something in it shifted. Not softened, but moved, the way a bone shifts after something has passed through it. The building, she said. In Mapo. Yes. You were going to buy it. Yes. Without telling me. Yes. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite the opposite of one. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. Then she took it away. "Do you understand?" she said, and her voice had gone rough at the edges, the roughness of something that has been held for 6 weeks and is finally being set down. How much time I spent in the past 6 weeks telling myself it wasn't real. How much work that took. How many mornings I woke up and did it again from the start because by the time I went to sleep the night before it had come undone. She looked at him. "Every day, Minjae. I had to rebuild that lie every day." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." "That's twice you've said sorry." "I'll keep saying it until you have somewhere to put it." She looked at him. The wet was back at the corners of her eyes. Not falling, held. "I'm not small," she said. "I need you to understand that. Whatever comes with you, the risk, the men, the 89 pages, all of it, I am not small enough to be crushed by information. I get to decide what I can carry, not you. I understand that now." "You should have understood it then." "Yes." "So what do you want?" Her voice was direct. "Right now, tonight. What do you want specifically from me after 6 weeks and 2 men on a block and a speech about restructuring?" He looked at her. He had operated for 20 years in environments that punished imprecision, and he was not imprecise now. "I want to tell you everything, all of it, over as many nights as it takes. I want you to have the real information, and I want you to make the real decision, the one you make for yourself. And whatever that decision is, I will not make a counter-decision above it." He held her gaze. "And I want to know if the building in Mapo is still available." She looked at him for a long time. The cafe behind her threw warm light against her back. Somewhere inside, the jazz trio had started something new, something that moved slower than everything they'd played tonight, and the sound of it came through the door and the window and the cold air between them, and it sounded, Minjae thought, like the musical equivalent of a person finally sitting down after a very long walk. "The building is still available," she said. "I checked on Monday." He let out a breath. She looked at him for another moment, and then she looked at the block, and then she pulled her coat tighter with one hand and said, "Walk me home." He fell into step beside her. Sungwook materialized at the end of the block, and Minjae gave him a single small shake of his head, and Sungwook stopped and let them pass and kept his distance, which was the correct call, and Minjae would not need to specify it. They walked through Itaewon and down toward the river, and the city moved around them, and he talked. He talked in a way he had not talked since he was 22 years old, and still young enough to believe that full disclosure was something a man in his position could afford. He told her about his father. He told her about the inheritance and what it had contained and what it had required of him in the first 3 years. He told her about the architecture of the Black Phoenix Syndicate, the bones of it, what it was and how it ran and who it touched. He told her about the moment, 4 years ago, when he had begun to understand that the empire he had inherited was also the cage he was living in, and that the only exit was to dismantle it from the inside, which was the kind of project that required a reason larger than profit and longer than ambition. She walked beside him and listened. She did not interrupt. She asked 3 questions, all of them precise, and none of them sentimental, and he answered them with the same precision. She did not recoil from any of it. She did not perform courage either. There were 2 moments where she went quiet and he could see her processing something difficult, and both times she took a breath and walked through it. They reached the river. They stopped at the railing above the water. The Han at night was black and wide and reflected the city on both banks in long, broken columns of light. A cold wind came off it, and she leaned into it slightly, the way people lean into wind when they've been indoors too long and need to remember what weather feels like. "The Choi faction," she said. "Tonight. Is that finished?" "Tonight is finished. The underlying tension resolves when the transition completes. That's 18 months. 18 months of men on blocks. Managed men on blocks. With full security protocols that I should have had in place around you 6 weeks ago and didn't because I made the wrong decision." He looked at the water. "I will not make that decision again." She looked at the water too. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not afraid of some of this," she said, "because I am. Parts of it are frightening, and I think pretending otherwise would be stupid." She paused. but I've been more afraid every morning for 6 weeks of what it felt like to watch something real walk out of a cafe and tell myself it was just a transaction. She turned to look at him. That's the fear I can't manage. The other one I can learn. He looked at her. Don't make decisions for me again, she said. No, he said, and don't buy me buildings without telling me. I won't. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned back to the river and the wind moved her hair off her shoulder, and she reached out and placed her hand over his on the railing, and it was the most ordinary thing that had happened to either of them in months. And it was also the most complete. The Meridian Group's sit-down happened 3 weeks later. Min-jae walked in with Hyun-soo and 2 legal consultants and the complete documented framework for the Black Phoenix Syndicate's transition out of criminal operations, and he sat across from Chairman Voss's counsel for 4 hours. And when he walked out, the first phase agreement was signed and the 18-month clock had started. The Choi faction requested the sit-down through the correct channel the following week. Hyun-soo managed it. The terms were not what Chairman Choi had wanted. He took them anyway, because the alternative was to challenge a man who had just secured the backing of an international security corporation, and Chairman Choi was many things, but he was not that miscalculated. Lim Tae-yong's informal perimeter operation was acknowledged but not punished. Min-jae told him in 4 words that the perimeter was now formal. Lim nodded and said nothing, which was the correct response, and one of the many reasons Lim had been with the organization for 9 years. Baek Joon-ho's situation was resolved through a legal channel that did not require Min-jae to be in the room, which was how such situations were best resolved and how Hyun-soo preferred to operate when given latitude. South. The building in Mapo was purchased in December. Not by Min-jae, at least not in any way that appeared in the transaction documents. The acquisition was structured through a property management company with no traceable connection to the Black Phoenix Syndicate or to Min-jae personally, and the lease was registered in Nia's name at a rate that reflected the building's actual market value, which was lower than she had feared and which she insisted on verifying independently with a real estate consultant who had no idea who had arranged the rate. She did not ask how it had been arranged. She had decided there were categories of information she would receive when offered and not pursue when not. And the specific mechanics of real estate in Seoul fell into the second category as long as the documents were clean. The documents were clean. She spent 3 months on the renovation. Min-jae came twice a week, sometimes more, and he did what he had offered to do on the sidewalk in Mapo in October. He looked at the bones and told her whether they were good. He talked to the contractor about the structural load on the south wall and whether the pendant light rigging was properly supported. He argued with the electrician about the wiring configuration for the kitchen pass-through and turned out to be correct. He showed up once on a Saturday morning in paint-stained clothes she had not seen before and spent 4 hours helping refinish the original wood floor in the main room, working methodically from the east wall west, on his knees on the floor, which was the kind of thing that was very difficult to frame correctly alongside the image of 2 men on a block in Itaewon receiving a message. She told him this. He said nothing and kept sanding, and she went back to the window trim she was painting, and they worked in the specific comfortable silence of people who have stopped needing to fill each other's quiet. He told her, on one of those Saturday mornings, that his mother had loved music, that the apartment in Mapo where he had grown up had always had something playing, not jazz, mostly old folk songs, the kind his mother had grown up with, simple melodies and minor keys that felt like weather. He said it the way people say the thing they have been not saying for a long time, quickly, looking at the floor rather than at her, with the specific vulnerability of someone unaccustomed to the weight of their own disclosure. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her paintbrush and said, "What kind of music do you want in the cafe?" He thought about it. "Jazz," he said, "the kind where nobody's trying to show off." She smiled at the window trim. "That's very specific." "I know what I like." "You really do," she said. And the way she said it meant more than it said, and they both knew it, and neither of them elaborated. Hosham. Midnight Lantern Cafe opened on the first Thursday of April. Nia had not chosen Thursday deliberately. It had simply aligned with the schedule. The permits cleared on a Tuesday, the final inspection passed on a Wednesday, and Thursday was when it made sense to open. It was only after the fact, standing at the door at 5:45 in the morning to receive the first coffee delivery, that she noticed the day of the week and laughed out loud alone in the empty cafe with the sound bouncing off the newly refinished floors. Min-jae arrived at 7:15. He sat at a table near the south windows. The pendant lights above him caught the April morning light and split it into something warm and fractured. Nia brought him tea she had chosen specifically, a barley blend from a supplier in Jeonju that she had spent 2 weeks selecting, and she set it down in front of him, and he picked it up and drank it and said nothing for a moment. Then, "The bones were good." She sat down across from him. Not the way she'd sat across from him in Blue Fern 11 months ago, perched on the edge of something uncertain. She sat the way a person sits in a room they have built. "They were," she said. The cafe filled through the morning. The crowd that came in that first Thursday was small and mostly composed of people Nia had personally told. Camille and David, who drove up from their new apartment in Mapogu and took the corner table and stayed for 3 hours. 2 baristas from a cafe in Hongdae whom Nia had befriended in her first weeks in Seoul and who had given her their best sourcing contacts. A young painter who had wandered by and seen the sign and come in because the window display was, in her words, the first honest window she'd seen in this neighborhood. Yunsu arrived at noon. He sat alone at the bar, ordered tea, read something on his phone, and left an envelope under the saucer that contained, when Nia found it later, a short handwritten note in Korean that Nia photographed and sent to her translation app. The app returned. Well chosen. PHS. She did not know who PHS was. She stored the note anyway. Sung-wook came in at 2 o'clock in civilian clothes, which she had never seen him in. He ordered a coffee, drank it in 10 minutes, and left. He held the door for 2 students who were coming in with laptops, which meant 3 words of interaction, the most she had ever witnessed him produce in a non-operational context. The evening brought a fuller crowd, artists and students, and a table of older women who had been redirected from a nearby cafe that was full, and who stayed for 2 hours talking loudly and happily about something that made them all laugh at intervals, and who left a very large tip and said they would be back next week, and who Nia believed completely. At 9:15, when the cafe had settled into its late evening rhythm, a few couples, a few people alone with books, the sound of something slow on the speaker that she had curated specifically for this hour, Min-jae stood up from the south window table. He had been there, on and off, for most of the day. He had left twice for calls, both brief, both taken outside, both things he came back from without visible residue, which he had learned to read as meaning they were operational and managed. He had eaten the soup at lunch without comment that it was good, which from him meant it was very good. He had spoken to Camille and David for 20 minutes, and to no one else, which was the correct social calibration for a man at his partner's opening who understood that today was her room and not his. Now he stood up and walked to where she was standing at the bar, and he extended his hand. She looked at it. "The song," he said. She listened. The speaker in the corner was playing something she had put on the playlist without particular intention. A slow piece, piano forward, unhurried. She had chosen it months ago for this specific hour. She had not thought about why it sounded familiar until now. It was not the same song from the Busan wedding. It was a different song, but it had the same quality. The particular patience of music that is not in a hurry to arrive anywhere, that is content to exist in its own motion. She looked at his extended hand. She took it. He led her to the small open space between the tables, not large, just enough for 2 people who were not trying to perform dancing, but simply to move together in the way of people who have learned each other's weight and direction over the course of a year of Thursdays, and 1 impossible weekend, and 6 weeks of silence, and 3 months on their knees on a wooden floor. She followed. He led. The room went on around them. The couples at their tables, the people with their books, the older women who had stayed later than they'd planned, and were now watching with the specific benevolent approval of people who have lived long enough to recognize something real when they see it. "Min-jae," she said quietly against his shoulder. "Yes." "I'm glad you walked in out of the rain." He was quiet for a moment, his hand at her back, the cafe light warm above them. "I came in for the quiet," he said. "I stayed for you." She pulled back slightly to look at him. He looked back. No performance in it. No strategy. Just his face, which she had learned the way you learn the rooms of a house you intend to live in. not all at once, but in the accumulation of ordinary moments until the layout is in your body and you can move through it in the dark. "Mrs. Kang," he said. Not a question. She looked at him for a moment, then the gap showed, the real smile. "Not yet," she said, "but I've stopped pretending I don't want to be." He held her gaze. Something in his face, behind the stillness he'd carried for 20 years, settled. Not collapsed, settled. The difference between a wall coming down and a door finally opening, which is less dramatic and more permanent. The song continued, unhurried, patient, doing exactly what it was built to do. The pendant lights above them caught and held the warm light of a room that had been built from nothing by a woman who had crossed an ocean to rebuild herself, and a man who had dismantled an empire from the inside to become someone worth coming home to. And the Han River moved outside in the dark the way it always moved, indifferent and enormous and beautiful. And the city that contained all of it kept going in every direction at once, the way cities do, not knowing or caring what had just arrived inside one small room on one side street 2 blocks from the water. It didn't need to know. The room knew. That was enough.